Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to Three Things I've Learned, where we share the stories that shift our souls. I'm Susan Dolci, and I am super, super grateful for everybody who is tuning in today. So, if you know me personally, if you've been to my house, you will know that I have every book that Glennon Doyle has ever written. Like even when she was Glennon Doyle Melton, like I've got every book. She's the queen of empowerment, in my opinion. And I pretty much like everything that she has to say. Like I said, I have every book, but I came across a quote of hers. I don't know if it's in a book, if it was off a video, but it's this. And it says, maybe anger is like compassion. It can point us directly to the place in the world where we were born to help heal. So, it's like if you're really fired up about something, there's a cause that you're really passionate about, that sort of compassion that arises in you is, it's anger and compassion. They kind of go hand in hand in that regard. Like, and you want to go and you want to fix that thing. But I'm going to ask you to think about that quote in a slightly different way, and that maybe it's also our anger that points to exactly like what we need to heal in our lives. I mean, anger sends us a powerful message. And I think so many of us have been taught to ignore it. It's not polite. We shouldn't show our anger. It's an emotion we really aren't taught how to deal with. So today I am talking with my friend, colleague, and spiritual life coach, Britta Albert, about how anger is sort of like the cousin of fear, and how we can process our anger and our rage into living a more fearless life. Britta specializes in helping people identify and heal toxic generational cycles and traumas. Paired with her intuitive gifts, and if you have tuned in before, Britta's been on the show and we talked about her intuitive gifts. She also assists her clients in taking back their power and breaking through self-sabotaging behaviors that hold them back from success. And most recently, she is the creator of the Fearless Life Formula. Welcome, Britta, to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. We talked about last time when you were on that we were holding a spot to talk specifically about this because you've done a lot of work, a lot of personal work in this area to help put this program together. So why don't we start there? Why don't we talk about your childhood journey with anger and repressed anger?
Yeah. So actually, this works perfectly from where we left off last time, because that journey that I went through is what really ultimately birthed this entire process. So just a quick little recap. Last time we talked about what it was like growing up with being able to see ghosts and experience entities and things like that. Then I went through the repression period, and it was during that where the anger was kind of born in me. And an interesting thing happened when I was younger, and anger became my protection. It became this covering that went over me. And the purpose of the anger was to protect me from feeling alone, feeling afraid, all the fear that went along with why the things started to be suppressed. But it unfortunately perpetuated itself because we don't know how to handle it. We're not generally taught, like you said, how to handle anger, how to process it in a healthy way, or even how to view it. We see it as an enemy. We see it as something that we want to push away from ourselves, that you shouldn't be an angry person, or look at that person over there. And we see by comparison how the world treats somebody who's angry. So then we look inward and we say, oh, well, either I'm going to reject this part of myself or I'm going to wallow in it. And when I was younger, I chose to wallow in it.
I think a lot of people do that. I think that's this, yeah.
And what it did is I ended up becoming the type of person where I was so afraid of rejection, and I was so afraid of being hurt by not being accepted as I was, that I would be the first person to reject other people. But then what did
That
that
was
do?
that was a safe thing to do, right?
Exactly.
You hurt
But
them before they hurt you.
I found myself alone. Senior year in high school was rough. I had one friend. I had pushed everybody else away. And it fueled more anger because
Yeah.
although it was my own doing, I was not at the place to identify what happened and to take ownership of what happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perspective. I mean, again, especially at 17, 18 years old. I mean, their brains are still developing,
Right.
and then
Even though we think we know it all.
well, yeah, that's the funny thing about teenagers is, of course, they know everything and that they know nothing. But yes, I'm sorry to, yeah.
No,
So cut
that's
yourself some
exactly
slack.
what
You're
it
a typical teenager.
was. Yeah. And then after that, I went into the army and got married, got divorced, had kids, like all of that. So I never really had a safe moment to process any of that. It was years later. I mean, gosh, 15 years later, roughly, to where I could finally sit down and it was finally safe to process all of that. And by then, I'd already done Diamond Coach processing and I was encouraged, hey, go ahead and see if you can start a program. And I was like, that's a great idea. What does the world need? I think that there's such a great need to teach people how to process anger. So I dive into this. Are you going to say something?
I was
Sorry.
going to say, can we, because I would like to know before we get into, because there's a lot to unpack in your program. And so what was the turning point for you? What was that, that moment when you were like, when you understood that the anger had a message and you weren't afraid of confronting it?
So that's where I was heading.
Okay. Sorry.
Unfortunately, it took me that long to get there. I went in with the idea that I saw a need and I was going to fill a need.
Mm-hmm.
But I found out I was talking to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the process of putting together this program. So just within the last 18 months was it really impactful to me. I went on small journeys,
Mm-hmm.
but I never faced it until putting together this program. And I had to stop. And I took myself through it. And I went to the mountains all by myself for the first time. And for some people, that might not be a big deal. For me, that was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And
I think if I remember, you even encountered a bunch of bad weather. So it was more like, it was a journey.
yeah, it was treacherous. It was scary.
Mm-hmm.
I got up there and I went with the intention to face anger and rage. And I went with the frustration of realizing that I didn't know the difference between anger and rage.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted it to be this beautiful, powerful, impactful purge weekend
Mm-hmm.
where I could go up there and I could scream and it would nobody would hear me and wouldn't have to freak out my kids or my husband or anything like that. Like I could just go and whatever needed to come up, I would honor it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had to eat my own words. Whatever comes up, I needed to honor. That was the point. That's what I said. And what met me on the mountain was fear. Mm-hmm. And that was my aha moment.
So you go up there to process anger and rage and buried beneath all of that,
mm-hmm.
what was really feeding the anger and the rage, which I definitely want to get into talking about the difference between those two, because I don't even know if I fully understand it. But it was fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fear in the driver's seat.
Yep. And all of my anxieties came up. My body had a physical reaction as I was allowing myself to speak the unspeakable. Mm. And I honored everything that came up. And that was really when I realized that the anger, my willingness to go where the anger was, allowed the anger to reveal its true face. Mm. Its true face was fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it always had been. It always was my protector. For me, that type of specific trauma that dealt with the anger, the bitterness, self-hatred, it was fear, but it was, like you said, compassion.
Mm-hmm.
The anger in itself was compassion to protect me from feeling that fear when I wasn't ready to feel it yet.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the fascinating part about our egos, our psyches, is how the mechanisms we put in place to protect ourselves, especially when we're small children, and not knowing what they are or where they came from, we carry them into adulthood, and they've been our buddies, they've been with us all the time, but they've never had an opportunity to like sit and chat. They're just always in protective mode, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming up on a break. When we come back, I'm we're going to talk about the consequences of anger, but I've heard you also talk about, and I think this is profound, and I really want to get into it a little bit deeper. Sacred anger, how that what all of what it's trying to tell us,
Mm-hmm.
and why it's so important. And then also, again, I would love to chat more about the difference between anger and rage, because I think rage has a life of its own, completely different from anger, right? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So you are listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and today I'm talking with my friend, my colleague. She's also a spiritual life coach. Her name's Britta Albert. She's amazing. She's been on the show before. If you like her, go back and find that one. It was about being able to see ghosts and spirits when you're growing up, which it was a fascinating talk. So anyway, before we dive in back into anger and rage and fear, where can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
So one of the easiest places is my website, which is just brittaalbertcoaching.com. They can follow me on Facebook at Albert Coaching, Instagram at Britta Albert LC, and at YouTube, just type in Britta Albert, and I'm the first one to pop up.
Yeah, and I actually made a note, but I talked about it the last time you were on. She's got an awesome YouTube channel, guys. Like, she has so many videos on so many different topics. So like, if you want to just go down the rabbit hole with Britta Albert, like if you got all sorts of time, and yeah, totally engaging, wonderful videos. So also check that out. So before we went to the break, we were talking about how when you went up to the mountains to, explore anger and rage, you found out about fear instead.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was that like? And we were talking about like the consequences of carrying all of that anger for years and years, and how that impacts all the different areas of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of a multi-part question. I'm going to
Yes, it
answer
is.
what it was like in the mountains specifically first.
Yeah.
I definitely experienced a purge. It was not the purge that I intended or expected, I should say. I intended to experience a purge, but I had an expectation, and I should learn by now, when I set an intention, to not have an expectation how it's going to show itself. So when I experienced it, I didn't get to recognize what it was in the moment, but that in and of itself is divine, because I think when you're experiencing fear and you're purging fear, the only way through it is to feel it. And when we know what's going on, we can kind of soothe ourselves, which is helpful. But to to not really, I gave in the moment. I completely was immersed in the fear because I went up there to experience anger and rage, and the fear caught me off guard. So in a way, it was way more productive because I bought into it
Mm-hmm.
and I felt it authentically instead of being able to self-soothe and talk myself through it. I did. I allowed it to come up. I remembered why I was there. I allowed myself, for the second time ever in my life, to speak the unspeakable things, the true fears in the depths that we hesitate to even say, either out of fear of manifestation or just saying it out loud can throw you into an anxiety attack. I was already in the midst of one, so it wasn't getting any worse.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Well, yeah, because I was like, when you're not expecting fear, and then all of a sudden you find yourself there. Like would you have gone on the trip? Sidebar question. Would you have even taken the trip if you knew that it was actually fear you're going to be encountering?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't know that I would have been courageous enough to walk into that. It was a complete cocoon moment.
Mm-hmm.
You go from the caterpillar into the cocoon state, and of course you come out the butterfly, but the cocoon state, you liquefy and rebuild. And
Mm-hmm.
I was liquefying. And over the course of that weekend, I rebuilt. And I left with those like weak little baby wings, but they were there and they were ready to be exercised and get stronger. And I wouldn't have got that. I wouldn't have got that had I had what I expected to encounter.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's because if I have similar to knowing that, or understanding, I shouldn't say knowing, similar to understanding that fear drives a lot of anger. It's also in some of the work I've done too. It's also when you dig down deep enough, it's also hurt. Like when I get to my angry parts, it's not so much fear as it was just this deep sense of hurt and disappointment. And so yeah, fear, like, it's an amazing thing. So what did fear, it have a message for you? What was the message? Like, what did it do, this program? This is what we're going to do.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the message was the power of transformation. The message was you can survive what you think you can't survive.
Wow. That's big.
I mean, the things that
You,
I had convinced myself that would literally kill me,
mhm.
I felt it all.
And you woke up the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's big. I mean, I've been in those moments too, where I thought I was going to just collapse, you know, dare I say die from fear, because, your mind's just, so yeah, I get that. And kudos to you. And thank you for sharing that vulnerable space, because it's very vulnerable. So the second part of the question, since I kind of threw it to you all at once, is so you had this moment where you realized it was fear. You got through the other side of the fear, uh, and then what? Realizations, like, what were the consequences? Could you look back then, after, and when you're on the other side of it, and say how now that had impacted? It was fear that was driving everything.
Yeah. I mean, it was a mixture.
Mm-hmm.
So there was absolutely 100% hurt there.
Mm-hmm.
And you hit that right on the head. The anger, which really was the rage, came from the hurt. And the protection part of it was like protecting me from feeling the fear.
Mm-hmm.
So it was so multi-layered that I wasn't able to pull it apart and see each piece for what it was until afterwards. So experiencing the fear bit was so potent that I was able to identify that as separate from the hurt And anything that came after the fear was just so much easier to process, so much easier to feel, so much easier of those internal conversations to be compassionate with myself, because I already went through the worst of it.
So did you like how, just out of curiosity, because I mean, when you work with clients and uh, especially issues around fear and that, did you journal? Did you just video? Did you like what? How did you work through it? Or did you just sit and scream and cry? And I know what I would do. Because I would just sit and talk out loud to myself. And then I would scream and yell at all of the people that hurt me or that, and then, because I'm not a journaler. So I'm just curious, like, because I think it
Love
helps.
you even more.
I think it helps to, for people to have, to see that, there isn't any right way or wrong way to get through it. And I, full disclosure, I still do that on a regular basis. It's usually when my husband's out of town. Well, my kids don't live here anymore. And I have like the whole evening to myself, where I just, just have a full on meltdown and let it all just come out of me. And then I'm like,
Yep.
it's sort of
I
like that.
fully recognize how wonderful it is to journal, but I am not a journaler. And what you said is exactly what I did. And I actually recorded it with the intentions of being vulnerable enough to share it on my YouTube channel. The universe intervened, and my phone, I lost everything, every picture of my kids, every video, my phone completely got wiped. So I was like, okay, I was not supposed to share that. That one was for me.
Wow. Yeah, that was a big, yeah, wow.
But that's what I did. I do have vocal recordings. As I was driving there, I let the rage come out on my drive.
Mhm.
And that probably is also what helped make way to experience the fear when I got there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm definitely more, I'll record myself on a video or audio or just no recording, just let it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That was really divine intervention. Because when stuff like that happens to me, if like 2 or 3 times I'm trying to do something and it's not working, I'm like, okay, I get the point.
Yeah.
This isn't supposed to be a thing that I put out in the world. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. So, before we're still going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the difference between anger and rage. But we're going to go into another break here. And when we come back, we're going to do that, anger and rage. And even what I think is, I can't say it's more important, it's all important. But Britta has not a theory, because I believe it's a thing, but how there's a spectrum of emotion within that whole anger and rage. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to take another quick break. You're listening to 3 Things I've Learned, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is 3 Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and today I'm talking with my friend, my colleague, spiritual life coach, Britta Albert. She's also a diamond process coach. Go Diamond Process Coaches. And we've been talking about fear, how specifically how anger is, like I said in my intro, sort of the cousin to fear. And how do we allow anger to show up in our lives safely, effectively? We've never been taught how to do this. We are supposed to shove down our anger. We're not supposed to, we're supposed to be nice girls, specifically for women. But anger is a real thing. And then before we went on the break, we were talking about what we wanted to talk about, anger and rage. Because there is a difference. As I said kind of before, I feel like anger, like rage is the embodiment of anger. Like you just need to hit something or scream or so I feel like um, it's like anger on steroids. But I want to
Mhm,
know what you think, Britta.
mhm. So I was so frustrated, and this was the purpose of me going to the mountains, to figure out once and for all what the heck the difference was
Mm.
between anger and rage. And I was raging, trying to figure it out. I was so mad that I couldn't tell the difference. And it was so eye-opening for me when I realized that what I thought was anger was actually rage.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is what I discovered through this for me personally is that anger in and of itself is benign. Anger only becomes whatever we judge it to be when we put our judgments on it, when we decide what it is. Anger in and of itself has a purpose, and that can be to help us identify what our moral compass is. That can help us identify red flags in relationships. And a big one is it is a way for our body to help us identify when our personal boundaries have been overstepped. And what
Absolutely.
happens when we don't acknowledge the anger? Because when we feel the anger, it's actually more of a frustration,
Mhm.
I would say. True anger, we misinterpret as frustration because since we don't have the urge to yell or hit something or take some sort of action,
Mhm.
we would say, well, that's not really anger. I'm just frustrated. But what happens is you bury that. You take no action against it because you feel like you're not supposed to, it's not socially acceptable, or whatever it might be. So, a lot of times when people think of anger or unprocessed anger, they'll think of yelling, they'll think
Mhm.
of uncontrollable bursts of rage, possibly physical altercations. Um, we have all of these ideas of what we think anger is. But in reality, it's ultra independence.
Mm.
It can be not, it literally the opposite of yelling. It can be shutting people off, like not talking to them
Mhm.
and trying to avoid the altercation. Because when you're feeling the anger, there's something that is in like dis-ease with the situation.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times it's actually opposite of what we think. So what happens to our body when we hold on to anger, when we're not speaking our truth, is it can actually manifest as disease, just to be cliche.
Yeah, yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
you can develop things like throat cancer, you can develop digestive issues when you're not speaking your truth and you're holding it all in your body. So rage, think of a bucket and the bucket is overflowing and you drill holes in the side of the bucket and you still have water coming into the bucket, and all of that is your anger that you're not processing, and the bucket is your body.
Mhm.
So when you drill these holes in the top of the bucket is technically not overflowing. The water or the anger can seep out through the holes and drain just to keep you from overflowing. That's what rage is.
Mhm.
Rage is the body looking for opportunities to purge itself of the toxic anger that you're storing. So when you eat something that is toxic, when you eat something that's going to make you sick, your body's your ally and it's going to try to purge it out and get it out of you. When you're holding on to anger and you're not processing it, you're not acknowledging that it's there, you're not honoring yourself or your boundaries, the rage is going to come up and it's your body's way of looking for an opportunity to purge that out.
Mhm.
And
Makes a ton of
that's when we
sense.
snap at our kids.
Mhm.
That's when we snap at our spouse. That's when we throw something. That's when we have road rage and we're all of the stress from the week, all of the stuff, if you work in the customer service industry, you have to take abuse with a smile.
Mm.
You're just stuffing that in because it's not safe to feel it in the moment. It's not safe to process it. And we're not processing it later. We get home and we just want to, put our feet up and turn on the TV and eat some dinner and go to bed and not think about it.
Mhm.
So where is it going? It's staying in our body. It's got to find a way out. And rage looks so ugly, and we have so much disdain for it and so much stigma, but really it's your body trying to help you. It's trying to purge it out.
Yeah, I love that bucket analogy. That's awesome because yeah, it's like if we're not finding a way to deal with it in a healthy way, and I mean, I think that's a question is, um, you know, as you were saying, you want to eat dinner and watch TV, or like pretend it's not there, or I know a lot of people who would eat it to numb it, or drink it to numb it, or
Mm,
and finding healthy ways to manage our anger, and also teaching our kids that, like, wow, like, if think about how much different our world would be if we could just find healthy ways to process our anger. And I think a lot of it, so much of it has to do with, like, we're not supposed to talk about it.
mhm,
So we're supposed to if a kid comes home from school and they're you know upset because they've been bullied, or they've been bullied by a teacher, or something happened at school.
mhm,
um and I don't think as a society we actually even have the vocabulary to talk about our anger in healthy ways, without just, like, spewing that you're upset about something.
mhm. Yeah, and I mean, perfectly aligns with what you said about the hurt as well. Like, you think about those days of schooling, and who's getting told to man up?
Mm,
Who's getting told men don't cry?
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
who comes into the world and has, statistically, not always, but statistically, the most issues with anger and rage?
Hmm.
But then on the flip side, I wonder, and I'm not going to say I know this statistic because it literally just popped into my head, but I wonder if we were to look up who has more cases of like throat or digestive cancers, men or women, because who is the one that's told you don't act out like that.
Hmm.
Be quiet, be pretty. So there's toxic grooming going on for both sides. One is told to swallow it and bury it. The other is told to swallow it and bury it. There's just two different ways of saying the same thing. That's shaming and suppressing the emotion of hurt and anger.
It also reminded me of a story. I don't think she'd get mad at me for sharing it. But one of our teachers, she had a moment where the story goes that she was she and her, I think, I'm not sure if they were married or not yet. So anyway, she was enraged about something, and she was cutting a grapefruit, and she just couldn't think of, like, she was just so enraged, and she just didn't know what to do. And she took the half a grapefruit and she threw it against the wall. She just slung it, and it hit the wall. And her partner looked at her and gave her the other half of the grapefruit as, oh, do you need to throw the other half too? Like, and think about how most people would, the reaction would have been like, are you out of your mind? What are you doing? What, like, what is up? And trying to, like, where it was like, let it out, you know, throw something, punch a pillow. I remember when I was a kid, um, uh, I, another, it's a school story, bullied, blah, 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 blah. And I came home and I was so upset. And my mom could see that I was, like, just pacing. And she gave me one of those. This is back in the day when there were phone books. And she gave me one of the skinnier ones. And I was so angry. And I think I was 12, and I ripped it in half. And she was like, do you need another phone book? Like, and I mean, I think that's some of the things we need to explore. I'm sure and we're going to talk about a little bit at the end, a little bit about your program, but it's finding healthy ways to to deal with our fear and our anger and not stuff it down or eat it or numb it or even exercise it to death. Because that's probably what I would do. It's like I would this must be healthy because I'm turning my anger and I'm putting it in, I'm running and I mean, that's not an unhealthy thing, but it's all the why, right?
Right.
What's the motivation behind it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're going to take one more break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the spectrum of anger. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned. I'm talking with Britta Albert today, and we will be right back. Welcome back. We are at the last segment of our show today. I am talking with Britta Albert. She's a life coach, and she has a new program out called the Fearless Life Formula. And we've been talking about anger and rage and fear and not just how to deal with it, but acknowledging, its role in our lives, where it is and where it's hiding, because it tends to hide in the dark shadows. Because as we were saying before break, uh, you know, how children, not only are they not taught how to manage it, I mean, there's the whole, for, boys, you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to um, hit, which of course we don't want anybody hitting anybody, but finding ways to deal with their anger and even just the vocabulary of it. And I was saying how that one time my mom gave me a phone book to rip up. And I remember when I ripped it up, I wasn't, I was like, did I just do that? Like, I had no idea I was strong enough to rip a phone book, but that's how angry I was. So let's talk about, like, I know in the very beginning of the show, I talked about sacred anger, which was a term I'd never really heard. The first time I heard it, you brought it up, and um, how we how we should maybe honor these emotions, not just learn how to deal with them, but honor what they're trying to teach us and tell us.
Yep. And for that, I'll jump into the spectrum
Hmm.
because the sacred anger exists within the spectrum, just as the toxic anger does. And if you think about a ruler and you think about the middle being at 0, and then you have -1, -2, -3, you have 1, 2, 3 on the other side. And so the positive is, just for simplicity's sake, we'll say where the sacred anger lives, and the negative is where the toxic anger lives. Well, we don't really need to talk about the toxic side of the spectrum. We're all very familiar with the toxic side of the spectrum. That's, again, where you hold it into your body. You get sick. You have all these things happen. If you don't purge it out, it results in rage if it needs to purge itself. That's the negative side of anger. We're very familiar with it. We hate it. But the neutral side of anger, that 0, is also important to recognize, because that 0 on the spectrum is the moment that we feel the anger, but before we identify it, before we give it a name, before we make a decision about it, before it becomes either side of the spectrum.
Before we judge it, yeah, because
Yeah,
that
before
when
we
you
judge
said that, yeah, that was to me, that was I don't want to. I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you
it.
said anger isn't doesn't mean anything until we put a judgment on it. Oh, you said it was benign until we put a judgment on it, and that's profound.
Yeah, that's when it's at that 0 on the spectrum.
Mhm.
And then the positive side is, again, where that sacred anger exists. And I have to reiterate this: the positive and negative is just for simplicity. Sacred anger exists in the negative end of the spectrum as well, if not lives there. But say if we're on the positive end of the spectrum and we're looking at that sacred anger, what is it about anger that is good? Well, again, we already said one of the things that it does is it helps you identify your personal moral compass,
Mhm.
helps you to know yourself better by it shows you, if you're not sure where your boundaries exist, it shows you.
Mhm.
You become
Yeah.
very familiar with them. Shows you red flags in relationships, things like that. But there's a amazing thing about anger that we don't think about. And to me, it is one of the most beautiful And other people can argue about sacred anger, but to me, this is my diamond part of it, is the fact that it is a propelling force.
Mhm.
That positive end of anger. Anyone who has ever been in an abusive relationship, doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, could be in a mentally abusive job.
Mhm.
Any kind of emotionally, physically, or mentally abusive, sexually abusive, any kind of abusive relationship where you're in it, we have a threshold. Depending on how much we love ourselves, we will never move until we're hurt beyond the threshold that we think we deserve. But once somebody has overstepped that threshold, it gives us the courage to leave.
Mhm.
But 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, when you're leaving that kind of a situation, it's not courage that you find, it's anger that becomes your courage. Because on that emotional scale, anger is going to be an easier step up from fear, versus courage is going to be up here. To go from fear to courage is kind of a quantum leap.
Mhm.
Very difficult when you're in the midst of terror or fear to jump into a place of courage. But you can step into anger, and that's much easier. That's much more realistic. And that anger is going to push you forward. It's going to push you out of that situation. Or if you've set a goal and you didn't achieve that goal, you can use that anger to propel you forward, to learn from your mistakes, to do it better next time, to see things as an opportunity. You just don't want to live there.
Mhm.
So it's so, again, compassionate.
Mhm.
It's such a beautiful gift when you're at that place of fear. Again, it can be done. People can make that quantum leap and go straight into courage. But most of us, we need a stepping stone. And anger is like, I'm right here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Grab hold. I'll push
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and that also, like I said in the opening quote, it's not just in our personal lives. It will drive us to help other people where they need to heal,
Hmm.
which is what you're doing, which is what your new program is about,
Yep.
the Fearless Life Formula. So let's chat about that before we run out of time.
Okay. So the Fearless Life formula is a replicatable version of my journey. And I take people through the steps. But one of the biggest things when it comes to the Fearless Life formula is honesty. And you have to be honest with yourself about what your triggers are. You have to be honest with yourself to acknowledge, like, what happened to me in the mountains, to speak the unspeakable. I had to be honest with myself about what was there. I
Mhm.
would love to say that I wasn't afraid of some of the stuff that I was afraid of. And to you, or to other people listening, the things may not have seemed that big of a deal, but to me, they were. So being honest with myself is also being compassionate and taking away the shame. And honesty takes so much courage.
Yeah, that's the leap. I'm no doubt that this program's going to heal a lot of people. I know you don't have a whole lot of spots left, this
Mhm.
launch of this program. So if people are interested in getting into this program, where do they find you again, and how can they get more information on that?
So the easiest way would be to go to my website, brittaalbertcoaching.com. There is a specific tab on it for programs. They can reserve a spot there. Or if you want more information, you can go to my Facebook page, which is Albert Coaching, and or you can put in Britta Albert and it'll pop up as well. On Thursday at 6:30, this Thursday, I believe that's the 18th, at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to go live and go more in depth about this so people can learn more about the program and how to get in. But it is a beta version starting out, so I already have a few people who've signed up, so there's only 16 spots left.
Well, that's also, I think that's one of the things that's going to make the program so um, spectacular. Is, I mean, it's a safe container. I think when people are processing these sorts of emotions, it needs to be a small, safe container that so, so they can be honest and confront all of the darker parts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Britta. This has been, I love having you on the show. This is always great. So yes, BrittaAlbertCoaching.com. Also, again, her YouTube channel. It's Britta. Is it Britta Albert?
Britta Albert, yeah.
Yeah. We all have a story to tell. We can live in the story or we can transform the story. It's your choice. But if you change your story, you can change our world. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to 3 Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci. Tune in every first and third Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more inspiring stories of radical transformations, courageous breakthroughs, and life lessons. For more information on Susan and the stories that shift our souls, visit her at SusanDolci.com. That's SusanDolci.com, DOLCI. We'll see you next time.